Growing up in suburban Boston, my childhood was a relentless battle for recognition in a household where I was perpetually overshadowed by my younger brother, Jake. From the moment he was born when I was 8, Jake was crowned the golden child in the eyes of our parents, Robert and Sarah. No matter how hard I tried to earn their approval, it was as if I were invisible. I vividly remember the sting of their indifference. When I won first prize at the 6th grade science fair after months of painstaking work on a detailed model of the solar system. The judges praised my mathematical precision, but my parents didn't even show up to the ceremony. Why? Because Jake had a t-ball practice, not even a game band that took precedence. The walls of our home were adorned with Jake's participation ribbons, while my award sat unopened on the mantel for a week before being tossed into the basement, forgotten. The favoritism was relentless. Jake's mediocre C+ grades were celebrated with fanfare, while my straight A's were met with distracted nods. When I enrolled in advanced placement classes, my mother fretted that Jake might feel bad about being in regular classes. On his 16th birthday, Jake was gifted a brand new car to boost his confidence, while I was forced to work part-time jobs just to save for college and buy my own clothes. Even at my high school graduation, where I was valedictorian, my parents spent most of the ceremony taking pictures of Jake playing in the stands. He was 10 years old and bored, so they missed the moment I announced my MIT scholarship. Instead of celebrating my achievement, they turned Jake's early baseball season dinner into a party because, as my mom put it, Jake seems a little down about all your accomplishments. It was then I realized I would never be enough. I was the practice child, the test run, while Jake was their masterpiece. Their blatant favoritism wasn't just hurtful, it was soul-crushing. Every achievement of mine was minimized, every milestone ignored, as if my existence was merely a footnote in Jake's story. Little did I know, this toxic dynamic would set the stage for the ultimate betrayal that would shatter my life years later. After years of feeling like an afterthought in my own family, I thought I had finally found solace in Amy, my wife. She was my safe haven, the one person who made me feel seen and valued. We met 4 years ago at a small coffee shop near my workplace, where she worked as a barista while finishing her teaching degree. Amy was warm, attentive, and seemed to genuinely understand the pain I carried from my family's relentless favoritism toward Jake. When I opened up about my childhood, she told me, "They're blind. They have no idea what they're missing." For the first time, I felt like someone truly saw me. Our relationship blossomed quickly, and within a year, we were married. Amy became my partner in every sense of the word, encouraging me to chase promotions, celebrating my successes, and creating a home filled with love, something I had never experienced growing up. But everything changed when Jake re-entered my life. After failing to make it in California, he reached out, claiming he wanted to reconnect and make amends for the past. Against my better judgment, I gave him a chance, partly because Amy urged me to. "People change," she said. "Maybe he's grown up." At first, it seemed like Jake had. He apologized for his past behavior and even stood up for me. When our parents showed their usual bias during family dinners, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, we could finally have a real brotherly relationship. Then, the unthinkable happened. I started noticing subtle changes in Amy's behavior. She and Jake grew closer, sharing inside jokes and spending time together when I wasn't around. I tried to ignore the red flags, their sudden silence when I walked into a room. Amy's phone quickly turned away when I sat next to her, their knowing glances. But the truth exploded into my life, one devastating night. While Amy slept, I discovered hundreds of messages on her phone, revealing a 6-month affair with Jake. They had been meeting in secret, planning a future together, and even discussing their baby. The pregnancy wasn't an accident, it was calculated. They had planned to tell me after the baby was born, assuming I'd be too attached to leave. The betrayal was unimaginable. The two people I had trusted most, my wife and my brother, had conspired behind my back, tearing apart the fragile sense of family I had tried to build. I filed for divorce immediately, cutting all ties with Amy and Jake. But the pain of their betrayal was only the beginning of the storm that would follow, as my family once again rallied around Jake, leaving me to pick up the shattered pieces of my life alone. The betrayal by Jake and Amy was devastating, but what followed was a cruel reminder of where I truly stood in my family. Instead of offering support or understanding, my parents doubled down on their lifelong favoritism, siding with Jake and Amy as if I were the one who had committed an unforgivable sin. The moment I called my mother to tell her about the affair and the pregnancy, her response was a gut punch. "Jake made a mistake, but he's going to be a father now. You need to forgive him and be the bigger person. Think about the baby." It was as if my pain, my shattered marriage, and my trust being obliterated meant nothing. Once again, Jake's needs and, now his unborn child, took precedence over my life. The pressure from my family only intensified. My parents didn't just ask me to forgive Jake and Amy. They demanded I support them financially. "They're struggling," my father said, as if that justified anything. "You're successful. It's your responsibility to help your brother." The audacity was staggering. They expected me to fund the life of the man who had slept with my wife and the woman who had betrayed me. Even worse, they framed it as a moral obligation, as if refusing to help would make me the villain. My mother went as far as to suggest that my emotional unavailability had driven Amy into Jake's arms, twisting the narrative to absolve them of any wrongdoing. It was a masterclass in gaslighting, and it left me questioning my own sanity. The final blow came when my parents showed up unannounced at my workplace, staging a dramatic scene in the lobby. My mother delivered a rehearsed speech about family loyalty, while my father stood by, nodding in agreement. "Your father and I have always provided for both our sons," she said, conveniently forgetting that I had paid for my own college education and worked multiple jobs to support myself. "It's time for you to step up and help your brother during this difficult time." The irony was unbearable. Jake's difficult time was the direct result of his own choices. Yet I was expected to bail him out. When I refused, they turned to emotional blackmail, using the unborn child as a weapon to guilt me into compliance. Their relentless pressure was a painful reminder of the family dynamic I had endured my entire life. No matter what I achieved or how much I suffered, I would always come second to Jake. But this time, I was determined not to let them manipulate me. Their demands only solidified my resolve to cut ties completely, even if it meant walking away from the only family I had ever known. As the dust settled from the wreckage of my marriage and the betrayal by Jake and Amy, the consequences of their actions began to unravel in ways that felt like a twisted form of poetic justice. Jake, who had always been coddled and handed opportunities on a silver platter, found himself struggling to navigate the real world. His reputation was in tatters after news of the affair spread through his professional network, and potential employers withdrew job offers upon discovering his scandalous behavior. For the first time in his life, Jake faced real consequences. No one was willing to overlook his mistakes or hand him a free pass. Meanwhile, Amy, who had once been a driven and independent woman, refused to take on full-time work, choosing instead to play the role of the helpless, pregnant victim. Together, they spiraled into financial instability, relying on handouts to survive. My parents, ever the enablers, stepped in to rescue their golden child. They drained their savings, took out loans, and even refinanced their home to cover Jake and Amy's expenses: rent, groceries, and prenatal care. The irony was almost laughable. After years of prioritizing Jake's every whim, they were now sacrificing their own financial security to bail him out of yet another mess. My father's retirement funds were dwindling, and my mother's stress was palpable. But they never once questioned whether their actions were fair or sustainable. Instead, they doubled down, insisting that families should stick together no matter what. But their sacrifices weren't enough to save Jake and Amy from their own poor decisions. Jake turned down multiple job offers, deeming them beneath him, while Amy rejected a full-time teaching position, preferring to rely on my parents' dwindling resources. Their entitlement knew no bounds, and it was clear they had no intention of taking responsibility for their actions. As my parents' financial situation grew more dire, they began to panic, realizing too late that their unwavering support of Jake had come at a steep cost. The fallout was a harsh reminder of the family dynamic I had endured my entire life. Jake's failures were always cushioned, while my successes were ignored. But this time, the consequences were too severe to ignore. My parents' financial ruin was a direct result of their blind favoritism. And for the first time, I felt a grim sense of vindication. They had spent a lifetime propping Jake up, but now they were paying the price for their choice. And there was no one left to clean up the mess. Just when I thought the chaos couldn't get worse, Jake and Amy took their audacity to a new level by dragging me to court. They filed a lawsuit demanding additional financial support, claiming that the stress of the divorce and my vindictive behavior had left them struggling to make ends meet. It was a bold and manipulative move, one that reeked of desperation. They argued that Amy's pregnancy was higher risk and required specialized care, and that Jake's inability to find a job was somehow my fault. The irony was almost too much to bear. After destroying my marriage and appending my life, they now expected me to fund their new beginning. The court date arrived, and I walked into the courtroom feeling a mix of anger and anxiety. Jake sat smugly in our father's old suit, while Amy, visibly pregnant, played the role of the vulnerable victim. My parents sat behind them, their faces a mask of misplaced confidence. Their lawyer spun a dramatic tale, painting me as the villain who had abandoned his family and sabotaged Jake's career. But my lawyer was prepared. She presented a mountain of evidence that exposed their lies. Surveillance footage of Jake's aggressive behavior at my workplace, social media posts detailing their smear campaign against me, and financial records showing that Jake had turned down multiple job offers. The most damning evidence, however, was Amy's prenatal records, which revealed a perfectly healthy pregnancy with no need for specialized care. The judge was visibly unimpressed. "Your clients seem to have committed perjury," he said, cutting off their lawyer mid-argument. The courtroom fell silent as the judge delivered his ruling. Not only were Jake and Amy's claims dismissed, but my alimony payments to Amy were reduced by 60%. The judge's words were a balm to my wounded soul. This court does not look favorably on parties who misuse the legal system for personal gain. The victory was bittersweet. While I was relieved to have justice on my side, the ordeal was a stark reminder of how far my family was willing to go to protect Jake, even at the cost of their own integrity. But for the first time in my life, I felt a sense of closure. The legal battle was over, and I had emerged victorious not just in court, but in reclaiming my self-respect. After years of enduring my family's relentless favoritism and the ultimate betrayal by Jake and Amy, I reached a breaking point. The courtroom victory was a turning point, but it wasn't enough to heal the deep wounds inflicted by my family. The final straw came when my Aunt Linda, who had never been involved in the family drama, reached out with a guilt-tripping message. She claimed my father's health was deteriorating due to stress and that my parents were on the verge of losing their home because of their financial support for Jake and Amy. "Families should stick together," she said, as if I were the one who had torn us apart. But when I refused to take responsibility for their mess, she lashed out, blaming me for Jake and Amy's affair and suggesting I had been a neglectful husband. It was the last in a long line of manipulations, and I realized I could no longer be part of this toxic cycle. I made the difficult but necessary decision to cut all ties with my family. I blocked their numbers, changed my email, and instructed building security to keep them away from my apartment. The weight of their expectations, their favoritism, and their betrayal had suffocated me for too long, and I was done being the family scapegoat. For the first time in my life, I prioritized my own well-being over their demands. To truly start fresh, I accepted a job offer in Seattle. The move symbolized a clean break from the past and a chance to rebuild my life on my own terms. My coworkers, who had supported me through the darkest months, threw me a farewell party, and their kindness reminded me that family isn't defined by blood, but by mutual respect and trust. As I packed up my condo, surrounded by boxes and memories, I felt a sense of closure. The chapter of my life dominated by my family's dysfunction was finally over. In Seattle, I found a new sense of purpose. The job offered a fresh start, and the city's vibrant energy helped me rediscover myself. I no longer felt like the invisible son or the betrayed husband. I was finally free to define my own worth. While my family continued to spiral, I focused on building a life filled with positivity and self-respect. Walking away wasn't easy, but it was the most self-loving decision I had ever made. For the first time, I was living for myself, not for the approval of others. The journey through betrayal, legal battles, and family estrangement taught me the most valuable lesson of my life. My worth is not determined by how others treat me. For years, I had internalized my family's neglect and favoritism, believing I was somehow less deserving of love and recognition. But as I stood in the ashes of my marriage and the wreckage of my relationship with my parents, I realized I had been measuring myself against a broken standard. My achievements graduating from MIT, excelling in my career, building a loving home with Amy Warmine alone, and no amount of indifference or betrayal could diminish their value. The support I received from friends and coworkers during my darkest moments was a revelation. These were people who saw me for who I truly was, not as a shadow cast by Jake's golden glow. Their kindness and encouragement reminded me that family isn't defined by blood, but by mutual respect and trust. When my coworkers threw me a farewell party before my move to Seattle, one of them handed me a card that read, "Your worth isn't determined by those who couldn't see it." Those words became my mantra as I embarked on a new chapter. In Seattle, I found freedom not just from my family's toxicity, but from the self-doubt they had instilled in me. I began therapy to heal the wounds of my past and learned to prioritize self-love and boundaries. For the first time, I felt truly seen and valued, not for what I could do for others, but for who I was. Walking away from my family was painful, but it was also liberating. I had spent a lifetime seeking their approval. Now, I was finally living for myself, and in that freedom, I found peace. As I packed the last box in my empty condo, surrounded by the echoes of a life I was leaving behind, I felt a profound sense of closure. The pain of betrayal, the weight of family favoritism, and the scars of legal battles were finally behind me. My move to Seattle wasn't just a change of location, it was a rebirth. The city represented a blank slate, a chance to redefine myself on my own terms. My new job offered not just a promotion, but a promise of a future filled with possibilities. For the first time, I was free from the shadows of Jake's golden child legacy and the toxicity of my family. As I drove west, I left behind the heartache and embraced the hope of a brighter, freer tomorrow. This was my fresh start, and I was ready to claim it.